Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark, and on behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our virtual event with Sara Goudarzi in conversation with Brian Platzer, discussing The Almond and the Apricot, a novel. For regular updates on upcoming events, please feel free to subscribe to our email newsletter. This evening's virtual event will end with a Q&A. To submit a question, please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. If you see a question on the list that you'd like for us to answer, please click the like button. We'll try to answer as many questions as time will allow. Also, consider supporting our bookstore and the author's work by purchasing a copy of today's featured book, The Almond and the Apricot. Just click on the green purchase button directly below the viewer screen. The link will redirect you to our website where you can continue your checkout process. You will not be interrupted from the broadcast. Now, a few words about our featured guest. Brian Platzer is the author of the novels Bed-Size Burning and The Body Politic, both from Atria/Simon & Schuster, as well as the parenting book Taking the Stress Out of Homework from Avery/Penguin Random House. He also writes for the New York Times, The Atlantic, New York Magazine, The New Yorker, McSweeney's, and elsewhere. Sara Goudarzi's work has appeared in the New York Times, Scientific American, National Geographic News, the Adirondack Review, and Drunken Boat, among others. She's the author of Layla's Day at the Pool and Amazing Animals from Scholastic Inc. Sara has taught writing at NYU, that's my alma mater, and is a 2017 Writers in Paradise Le Standiford Fellow and a Tin House alumna. Born in Tehran, she grew up in Iran, Kenya, and the US, and currently lives in Brooklyn. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the camera over to Sara and Brian. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation, everyone.
Thank you so much, Mark. I've been so looking forward to this event. Sara has written a really spectacular book, and I should reiterate what Mark said before we begin, which is that if you haven't yet ordered the book or you're not holding it in your hand, you absolutely must click that greenish, light green square rectangle on the bottom there where it says purchase a copy here. You won't regret it. I received my copy a couple days ago and I blazed through it. It has that unusual combination of sort of the merit of literary fiction and the thrill of an existential mystery, and we're going to get into the characters and sort of the writing of it and everything, but just so you don't forget later, please don't hesitate and click that buy now button before we begin. The only thing else I will say before discussing the run of show briefly is that towards the end we will have time for questions from you folks. So under one of us, you see the Ask a Question button towards the bottom. If you click that, you can then type in a question, and I will read those to Sara later on, and we will definitely get to as many of those as possible. So don't wait until the last minute to ask those questions. Anything you hear us talking about, whether it's about the process of writing or the book itself or characters or ideas that come up, you know, the more and the wider, the better. So what we're looking at is this is me saying hello and welcome. Afterwards, Sara's going to read an excerpt from her brilliant new novel. And then we're going to chat about it. And, you know, conversation will be free flowing, stick to the book and whatever else is on our minds, at which point we'll hand it over to questions from the crowd. So mostly, thank you so much for being here. You're in for a treat. Sara is a wonderful, brilliant writer. This book, The Almond and the Apricot, is spectacular. And let the show begin. So do you mind reading a couple pages to give people who haven't yet had a chance to read a sense of what the book sounds like?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for coming tonight, especially East Coasters. I know it's like 9 p.m., so it's kind of a big ask. So yeah, thanks for coming. I'll be happy to read the beginning, a little bit from the beginning of the book. So the way the novel is structured is it's in alternating chapters between two places. One is a not so much of a known place called Turin, and the other one is New Jersey. So I'll start with a Turin chapter, and which is chapter 1. It's called Siren. The basement smells wet. Other than random flashes of light coming through the small window, it's dark everywhere. I'm squatting on the cold concrete floor under a wooden table, covering my ears with my hands and wondering if our house will still be here tomorrow. Mom and Dad are sitting on chairs a few meters away. They're quiet. I don't like sitting on a chair. The table is like another roof. I told my parents it's like playing house, and they said it was okay. We all do different things when the lights are cut and the air raids begin. It always starts with a siren. This is how the government lets us know we're in danger and that we should hurry to our shelters. For most of us, the basement is our shelter, the only place we could survive if they drop a bomb on our house. This morning, the siren sounded at 3:12 a.m. I thought it was my alarm waking me up for school. But when I opened my eyes, the room was dark and the jays weren't squawking outside the windows yet. I pulled the covers over my head, but Mom's voice cut through the air. "Why aren't you up, Lily?" She sounded panicky, like she always does. "Coming," I yelled from under the blanket, trying to loosen my legs as fast as I could. I got out from under the warm covers, stepped on my favorite doll, the one I was playing with the night before, kicked her under the bed without looking down, and stumbled out. Dad was outside waiting for us on the raised stone patio. In the corner of the yard, opposite the pool, steps took us to the basement, an unfinished room originally for extra storage with an attached bathroom. But for the past 6 months, it's become our shelter. Mom even put canned food and dry bread in there, in case we're hungry and the bombing lasts more than the usual 15 minutes. In case. We are always ready for in case. Tonight, the Milky Way looked extra brilliant with the electricity cut off in the city. Its luminous band, like a million bits of crushed diamonds, arched the darkness. Then, the anti-missile aircraft made the sky glow the color of blood. As I squat under the table, the sound of the siren stops. The patchy thuds begin. It's the usual. First comes the loud sounds and then the smell of raids. Dad says it's a combination of ozone and cordite. I don't know what those things are. To me, it just smells of war. Then I start praying, or my form of it. I mumble loud enough to cover up the noise outside my head. Dad doesn't hush me, so I assume it's okay to pray when we're down here. I don't know any real prayers, so I've made up my own. It's kind of like begging, actually. Nothing I would want my friends at school to see. When the sun is out and I'm getting ready to school, the whole God thing seems silly, just like Dad says. It's only when the raids begin that I believe. I repeat my little prayer over and over again and promise, like I do every night, that I'll never not believe in God. Really, God, I promise I'll never think those awful things about you again. Just let this be over. Please let my family stay safe tonight. I'll be a better girl too, I promise. I'll start finishing my math problems before the day they're due, and I'll set my alarm clock on weekdays because deep down, I actually do know that Mom's pet peeve is waking me up for school. If you let me grow up with my parents around, I'll do something good, like become a teacher like Dad. Just please let my family and home be safe. Amen. I know you have to say amen to make all prayers official. It's like sincerely or yours truly at the end of a letter. You need to let God know that it's okay to stop listening to you and start listening to another begging child. There are a lot of us here wanting to make it out of the basement. It's the polite thing to do, really. The next chapter is Everydayness in Sewers and takes place in New Jersey. I whipped my silk robe around myself and rushed to the stove. Each of the round knobs was lined up at off, and the ignition ports were cold. Where else could that scorching smell be coming from? Milky early rays were just making their way through the windows, finding the sparse lines in my living room. The television, maybe? I put a hand on the back of and around the enclosure. It was cold. Sniffing first the living room air, then the hallway and the bathroom, and finally the bedroom, I surveyed the entire home and came up empty. Nothing was burning, yet that sharp sulfuric electrical odor had roused me from a dead sleep. That was the day everything changed. I'd woken up in that condo for 5 years, but that Thursday spring morning, a couple weeks after my 29th birthday, I woke up scared, confused, and suspicious, frantically searching for something that I was sure existed. That morning, I didn't know where I was. But I went about the day as if I did, because that was the only way I knew how. Mr. Coffee percolated the powdered remnants of beans from Colombia while I inhaled warm water vapors in the shower to cleanse my insides and wash away the uncertainty that was beginning to take root. Before long, dressed in a blouse and a pair of slacks with my wet hair twisted up with a brown clip, I stood by the answering machine sitting on the island separating the kitchen from the living room, and played my dead best friend's last message for the 103rd time. I stared beyond the machine at the ether that emanated the ringing voice of Spencer, as clear as though he were standing there, but as always couldn't get past the first 3 words, my not wife, and sipped the remains of Mr. Coffee's masterpiece, my daily ritual. By 7:45, I was at my cubicle, one of 63 gray lidless boxes on our floor. I looked through my emails. The plans for the new development were in. I walked over, retrieved them from our secretary's desk, and carried them through the leaden-hued corridor back to my work area, which seemed to have shrunk over the past few weeks. I seated myself at the desk, unrolled the plans, and searched for my page, Utilities, looked at the grade of the land, and tried to imagine where the sewers would go. Sewer design. To a very small group of people or a party crowd for all of 5 minutes, it may seem fascinating. But really, even to those folks, sewers lose their allure quickly. For me, it took about a year to exhaust my fascination with the underground maze of waste. That's when I realized the single most important point to grasp about designing sewers is that the shit must flow downhill. That's all one needs to know. Nothing else matters. Why it goes down and what happens at the end of its journey is not my concern. I only make sure it ends up there, not too fast, not too slow, but at a velocity determined by the masterminds of sewers, at least 2 feet per second. I hadn't acquired much new knowledge on the subject since that fact, and no matter how hard I listened to the news, no one ever made a breakthrough in my field. Sewers had already been mastered. So that's the end of the bit I'll read for you guys, so as not to bore everyone.
Not at all. That made me giggle when I read it, and again when you read it. No matter how hard I listened to the news, no one had ever made a breakthrough in my field. Sewers had already been mastered. I just love the idea of her like eagerly checking the news every day to see if there was more sewer information, and not coming up with anything. There are so many ways to start this conversation, and so many angles to delve into, but I thought we might begin with what probably stood out to many of our listeners hearing you read those first 2 sections, which is the architecture of the novel, that you have these 2 very distinct, very real voices who take turns narrating. And I'd love to hear you discuss, in as general or specific a way as you're comfortable with, just like the process of developing those 2 different voices. Did you know when you sat down to write this novel that was going to be the format? Did you sort of fall into that as you were developing one character or another? Because they are both so well rendered, so well done. They interact with each other in fascinating and complicated ways that I won't, give away too much about. But just from the start, how clear was it to you that this was going to be the framework?
That's interesting, because when I started to write this book, which was many years ago, the first 2 chapters were the ones that I wrote then, and they've pretty much remained unchanged for 90% of them. So I immediately knew that was going to be the format. I started with the girl in the basement, and with Lily, and then I started with Emma, and I knew that was going to be the structure of the book. It's going to be alternating chapters, and it's going to be 2 different stories and 2 different points of view. What I didn't know and what I didn't understand and had to work at is finding the connective tissue between these 2 stories, which at the time I honestly had no idea. So over the many drafts, I mean, you know how many drafts one goes through. Over the n number of drafts, I started to realize that Spencer was a character I needed to bring in. And that was the main story. That's what was happening. And that's what the connection between these 2 characters were. And once I figured that out, it started to fall into place, the relationship in a way that I hadn't understood when I first started the novel. I think and all novelists kind of understand this, that it's like it's an excavation process, right? Like you start thinking it's about one thing,
right,
the story, and most of the time it's not about the thing that you thought it was about, right? So you're like excavating and you find these other things and you're like, oh, this is not what the story was about. It was really about something else. And I think that's what happened essentially.
And how, and you do it so wonderfully. Like, how conscious were you of not letting one of the 2 voices overwhelm the other? Because I think that one of the brilliant aspects of the book is how much each of the 2 characters feels fully developed and, full of desire and disappointment and, all these emotions. Did you need to check yourself that like one character wasn't overwhelming the other, or was that not part of the process?
I mean, there came a point in one of those revisions that, and I keep bringing this up because it's like ridiculous, right? But
no, I know it's the back end of all of this, that for years and years and years you spend time thinking about these imaginary people, and then all of a sudden they're out in the world and you talk about them like they're real. But no, that, as you say, like the work of figuring them out and then refiguring them out and figuring out how they fit together and how it creates a plot or a narrative that brings people in. That's the real work of it. And you've done a marvelous job.
Thank you. I mean, I think at some point in one of those revisions, I like separated the 2 stories and I started to look at the narrative arc of each story, because I realized that each of them have to be developed separately in addition to being developed together. So at some point I did separate them. That actually didn't work, doing that, but it was a good exercise in understanding their stories and developing the characters. But then I was able to put them back together and then look at the story's overall arc with both of them in it. So in so many ways, I feel like it was like 2 novellas and then a novel,
Right. Right, and all 3 need to be successful. Like the novella about the little girl needs to be successful and work on its own. The novella about Emma and her adult life needs to work on its own, and then they need to seamlessly interweave together. And was that process the final one, like fitting them all together, or was each individual novella or part developing as you were trying to figure out the manner in which to put them together?
Sorry, I got confused with that question.
No worries. Was it like at the end, once you had these 2 novellas that worked on their own, did you then try to fit them together, or could you not be satisfied with each individual one until you understood how they fit together?
Yeah, so once I separate them, I immediately put them back together and worked on them as a whole, because I think it didn't work. At some point, I did separate all the chapters and just look at it and make sure that they worked on their own. But then I did put them back together because they did have to work together as an overall arc for the story. So mostly I worked on it, everything together at once. But there were times, I did buy one of those boards and pin everything up at too late a stage, I think, actually.
Right.
But at one point I did have to look at it on a macro level to make sure that it worked separately and together. And I took a highlighter and, highlighted the different chapters.
One more question while we're on craft about its creation, and then we'll get into the characters and some thoughts you have about them. But as a prolific and well-regarded science journalist, you've written thousands and thousands and thousands of words of nonfiction and reporting and trying to make sense of what's complicated. What percentage of those skills were useful in writing a novel? Was it an entirely different enterprise, or did you go back to some of the journalism, that's been your career for all these years, in order to mine the deeper truths of these characters?
I mean, I think the process is really different. I think writing a novel, I think, is infinitely harder than anything I've ever written in my life. Maybe the hardest thing I've ever done, I think.
I think that'll surprise a lot of people, because people think, with a novel, you can just make it up. Whereas in nonfiction, you have to go through the process of explaining reality. Do you mind talking a little bit about why that novel process is so daunting or so challenging?
So I can't speak to longer works of nonfiction because I've never attempted a book length work of nonfiction. So my only experience is short pieces, articles and things. But when I report for a story, when I do my reporting, I always know what the structure is. I just have it in my head. I don't have to think about it. With a novel, the structure is just kind of a mystery from story to story. I don't think there is a set way you can tell a story. And, a lot of times I think there's also this idea that you have, or I had, that, the second one will be easier because you figured out the first one. But it's not, because it's a different story and it requires its own structure, whatever that's going to be. And it's a path in the woods, and you just have to clear it for yourself. And each path is different. With journalism, there's all these facts you can draw from. There's all these structures that you can use that are already preset. They're short pieces, so you don't have this sprawling thing with all these threads you have to pull through hundreds of pages. So for me, I don't know. I would imagine narrative nonfiction is just as challenging, but I'm not sure. You recently co-authored a nonfiction book. And you've authored 2 novels, so I'm curious to hear what you think.
I found the nonfiction work to be considerably easier. The idea that there was a even if the truth wasn't simple, there was a lesson or a truth or a thesis or a claim that I was making, and then I could defend it. And it worked if I defended it and I explained, reasonably well what my thought process was. Whereas I think with the best novels, such as the one you've written, the complexity is really the important part. And you couldn't write a thesis that described, the feelings of the characters in this book. You couldn't turn the complexity of thought or emotion that you've created in this book into a simple article. And trying to figure out how to articulate that complexity is as much about word choice as it is about structure, as it is about character and psychology. And I think balancing all of those components, I agree with you. It's a juggling act, and you never know when it's done. You never know if you get it right. All you do is you keep on trying. Along those lines, it seems like what you so much of the book in both of these areas is about mourning, MOURNING, and loss. And it seems like, although you don't have, an explicit, stance on mourning or loss, it feels like that pervades a lot of the book and is a lot of the energy that propels the book. Emma has recently lost her best friend, Spencer, when the action of the book begins. And I'd love to hear you discuss, if you want to get personal, your own experience with mourning. If you don't, just sort of what you think is important to think about with loss in life, or what your character Emma is dealing with, like why that loss of Spencer is so significant, and how you as an artist try to depict that type of absence or that type of loss.
Yeah, I think from the outside, when I thought about loss, before I actually had experienced it, I had imagined it to be a linear process. So that it's something that happens and it's awful, and with time it gets better and you move on. Like some kind of line graph, that's how it is. What I discovered is it's a shapeshifter. So you think you figured it out after a while, after you experience loss, and it changes on you. You think you're fine, and you're walking down the street, and all of a sudden, all the air is sucked out of your chest because something comes to you, and you fall into another pattern of you fall into another part of it that you didn't expect. So I heard somebody describe it once as disorienting, and I think that's what loss is. It's very disorienting, and every time you reorient and you get on you think you have it figured out, it changes shape on you, and you're disoriented again. So there is a disorientation. There's an irrationality to it. There is a selfishness component to it too, and I think it's all wrapped into this one not so wonderful package. And that's kind of what I was trying to explain here with Emma. And she's constantly disoriented, and these things that she's feeling, and they don't really make sense to the outside world, but this is how people feel, right? I mean, we don't talk about it in public, but in private, because if you talk about it, then people think you're a crazy person all the time, right? So you can't talk about it. But
and that's so much of what your book is about, right? It's about trying to express what Emma's internal life is, and her constantly being met with people who don't quite understand it. Not necessarily is it their fault that they don't understand it, but they can't fully empathize because they don't fully understand the nuances and the specificities of what it is Emma has lost, so they don't understand her reaction to it. Is that?
Yeah, I think you put it very well. I think that's what it is. It's like you just cannot, even if the same two people lose the person that they love, their reaction and their whole process of understanding it is very different from one another. There's just no way that two people can even process the same loss the same way. So she doesn't have anyone really who understands what she's going through. She's kind of left to figure this out on her own. So, we don't know whether she is crazy or if she's a reliable character or unreliable character, but that's just part of it, is for the reader to figure out whether these things she's feeling or is she really seeing them? Are they real? Is she just losing it?
And what's so exciting is that the other characters in the book become proxies for the reader who, the other characters in the book are wondering the same thing as what you just articulated and what the reader is feeling, where is she crazy? Is she losing it? Is she just in mourning and sad? And this is part of grief. And you write I don't think rage is too hard a word. You write her rage so well because she not only needs to experience the loss on her own, but every conversation she tries to have about it ends up disappointing her in some way, where people say, oh, I know what you mean, but then they get it wrong, or people try to interpret it as like, oh, you're just in mourning, and that seems to be a problem as well as she sees it, where people sometimes see loss and mourning as like siloed in one part of your life. Like you're depressed, you're at home, you cry in bed, but really it seems to, according to the book, affect coworkers and romantic relationships and everybody in her life. Was that a reality or even a profound observation that you came to from research or just from getting deep into this character from whose perspective you were writing? Did it seem like the character, as you were writing her, started to feel emotions that you wouldn't have anticipated her feeling before you wrote the character? Or did it come more outside in, where you're like, oh, I want to make sure that I get anger and sadness and loneliness in here in a variety of ways?
No, I think it came from just kind of understanding the character and more getting deep in with Emma. I didn't do a ton of research. I did a little bit of research to understand guilt, because I think guilt is one of those emotions that is very, very often felt by people who are left behind. There's the guilt of what if I should have done this? What if I should have done that? And it's something that it's very universal. And I see it all the time. I hear from people all the time. So I did a little bit of research into that, into like the psychology of how people work through that and the blame that they put on themselves. But otherwise, the rest of it, I think, is just getting into the character. And as she developed, I started to, someone once said this, and I thought it was kind of like, I didn't believe that person. It was a writer that says like the characters just start doing their own things. And I'm like, yeah, right. But they do. Like there comes a point where when they're developed enough, they do things and they do feel things that are kind of like, in some ways it's them, it's not you. I mean, you're the one doing it, but really like they start to have this power over that.
Absolutely. And people used to talk about the muse writing through you. I like to think of it as nothing more exciting than when a character surprises you. When you put a character in a situation and then you feel the character wanting to do something different, and just that energy that you can follow is one of the greatest thrills as a writer I've found. We've spent time thus far on Emma. I wouldn't mind talking about Lily a little bit. She's suffering, but in a very different way from Emma. Can you talk a little bit about the world you put her in and what macroscopic pressure she's feeling simultaneously to being, I read her as a preteen girl just trying to be a regular preteen girl, with frustration with her parents and, a crush and what matters and what doesn't. And like, how did you write that in sort of a geopolitical way where she's suffering due to larger forces outside of her life, which is, war and fear and violence, but she's also just a kid being a kid. How did you try to puzzle that together?
Yeah, so I drew from some of my own experiences of living through war, where, you were just a kid doing your own thing and life went on. But what I was trying to do in the novel specifically, was kind of juxtaposition, two people whose world is destabilizing. So like Emma's world, Lily's literally in danger every single day, right? But she's so capable of at seeing the beauty and the lushness and the color of everything around her. And Emma's suffered this devastating loss, and she needs to learn to see the beauty and the color in her world. So I was very, it was very purposeful to sort of put them in, show them this way next to each other. But in terms of like, you know, she's just being a kid, it's just like, you know, you put people in situations like war or pandemic, something that's ongoing and lengthy, you have to live. So you live, you work around it, right? Like we thought if the pandemic went on for a couple months, it would be devastating. And look, we're in year, what, 3 now or 2 and change? And
years. It's
your
wow.
kids are probably going to the playground. I mean, you and I chatted for like a few minutes yesterday, and I think you were at the park when they were playing basketball. Like, you know, you have to
wearing, you know, full wearing masks along with everybody else, but playing basketball. It is.
Yeah, so you have to go on, right? Because there's no other choice. And as kids, you're not devastated. You just kind of go through life and enjoy, you know, whatever. I think there's a normalcy that comes in this like abnormal world we're in right now. We have to create some sense of normalcy. And I think it was the same thing for Lily. And it was the same thing when I was a kid living during the Iran-Iraq war in Iran.
Do you feel that intensity of experience, either from your childhood or from all childhoods, makes you a better writer about and for kids? I mean, you've written some spectacular stuff for the New York Times kids section. You've written for Scholastic. Do you feel like it's a different voice that you use when writing either for or about kids? Do you access a different part of your personality or your curiosity, or do you just try to hit the same honesty and hope, you know, it applies to children in the same way as it does adults?
Yeah, I don't have any kind of like magic answer to that. It's just I was writing for adults for a long time, and then there was an opportunity to start writing for Scholastic, and then I worked as an editor there, temporary editor several times, and I think it made my writing so much better. Like I had plateaued in my journalism in terms of writing, I felt like, and when I went and learned to write for kids, I feel like I got so much better because you have to explain the same things. You can't dumb it down, but you have to do it in very few words. So that kind of like really taught me skills that I didn't have before. So I think I just try to be honest, and I try not to talk down to kids. I think that's really important in the writing, at least. I don't have kids, but in terms of writing for them, I think if you're honest with them, then they'll appreciate it too.
No, and it comes across in your depiction of Lily, who, if written the wrong way, her experiences could seem trivial because they're, you know, what a girl is thinking about, caring about whether she can get the new pair of blue jeans that she's jealous of her friends owning or not, when people around her are literally dying. But I think that the way that you tell her vision of the world so honestly, you know, and depict it, that we feel as a reader that, like, yes, she would care about people dying and she would care about the blue jeans, and both seem very necessary and integral to her experience. We have a few questions coming in. I just wanted to ask one or two more of my own before we get to them, but they're wonderful. And please, those of you listening, if anything we've said has piqued your interest, let us know. If there's anything that you'd like more detail on that Sara has said, please don't hesitate to write in. But just like, as Americans, for the most part, in this group, I assume, facing another geopolitical confusing moment with Russia at the moment, just after we've extradited ourselves from from Afghanistan, I feel like there's an implicit confusion or fascination, or what Said referred to as Orientalism, or some like making the other far away and extraordinary and different from us who are here and safe. Do you feel like colleagues, friends, people around you in Brooklyn or the United States, or even in the news media, are able to see people within war zones honestly and just like human beings in the way that you depict it, or do you feel like there's a gap there in the typical American's understanding? Obviously, you have no, like, the typical American doesn't exist, and it's too broad a question. But I would love it. I would love your thoughts on just like if we do enough to humanize individuals who are profoundly suffering around the world, or if it's just an impossible task to ask of somebody who works in sewage management and goes about her daily life with her boyfriend.
Yeah, I think as humans, we cannot, and there's research behind this, but we're not able to be empathetic to numbers. So like if you hear that 100 people died in some tragedy, it's going to affect you the same way if it was 87 people. Right? But that's 13 lives between 87 and 100. That's significant. But our brains kind of just don't process when it gets to numbers, big numbers. But if we have a story we hear of one person, we can empathize with that story. So if Emma's heard about these wars, but they're a statistic in the evening news chyron, and she just 100 people dead and blah blah blah, and will never understand it. But in having this experience through Lily and having this one person's experience, I think she can empathize with that. It's really fascinating, like the psychology of this, because they've looked, and if you say like donate to 100 people suffering a tragedy, people won't do it, but they'll donate a ton of money if it was one person. So we can't, so it's like asking, so I'm going beyond Americans or whatever. It's
you're answering a better question than what I asked. So please keep on going.
I feel like humans just don't have the capacity to take that on, that kind of number, the figures on. But we do have the capacity if you give us a story about one person that we can follow on the news. So I think that, yes, we are empathetic. And I think I talk to friends and colleagues here in this country, and wonderful people. But, I myself am guilty of hearing a number and just clicking to the other channel or turning the newspaper page. So I think we need to do a better job if we want to bring attention to certain things to like humanize these stories.
And as an artist, does that activate you? Like, are you consciously trying to put humanity on numbers, or is that just something that you are interested in yourself and it came out organically in the writing of the book?
I mean, I really wanted to tell the story of war. Like that was really, it was something that was like part of the motivation for this book. It's like I wanted to talk about war, and I wanted to humanize it, and I wanted to have it be relatable to so many people. So make this story so that people would be sympathetic and then understand the horrors of it, looking at this young person. I mean, how much more horrifying can it get than seeing it through the eyes of a child who, doesn't see it as horrifying, which to me is even worse, right? Like the fact that like she's living through this and not horrified every single moment makes it much worse than than it was. So it's so normalized in her world. But I do think, even moving forward and with my next project, I do think like it is, personally, I'm not speaking for anybody else, but like it is my responsibility to bring awareness to the topics that I care about, which in this case it was this, and next case I think it's climate change for me. So
well, that's spectacular, and I can't wait to read that in whatever form it comes up. A lot of questions have come in, and some of them touch on aspects that we are discussing now or have previously. So I guess if you don't mind, I'll begin weaving some of these questions in to the conversation. Something that we were just discussing, I think, was asked by Jack in a slightly different way, which is, was there a moment that the idea for the story came to you? And was that idea realized, or did it change along the way? The story is a complicated question to ask because there are two stories and then a third that the two stories create. But was there that sort of epiphanic aha, like, I need to tell this story and I'm going to go do it now? Or was it more, there are worlds I would like to enter and I'll do my best to enter them slowly and see what happens?
Yeah. Hi, Jack. It was, I just wanted to tell the story. Like there was a moment and I was like, and I think, like I said, it was the first 2 chapters. I wrote them right away. And then after that, I had no idea what I was doing. It was like terrible. And I was just like, I went to take a workshop and they're like, what are you doing? Like, what's happening? It's terrible. But those first 2 chapters, I was like, I need to tell this story. Now the story changed quite a bit, as you know, and as Jack knows, because I know Jack is a novelist too. It changed and it kept changing and morphing. But initially I had this like yearning that I need to tell this story and I need to find a way to write this novel, whatever it takes. And I think about this sometimes because I think like, I don't always like writing. Like it's not something I enjoy all the time. So it's like, why do you do, somebody recently asked me, why do you do it if you don't enjoy the process?
Pam asked exactly that. Why did you decide to write this novel, considering the complexity, difficulty involved?
I think because at some level, I mean, I don't know, but I think at some level, I must think that these stories are important to tell, right? I think that's what it boils, like, because I've been thinking about this, like, why do this to yourself? Put all these years behind. I mean, but I think at some level, we feel like we need to tell these stories.
Was there, another question came in, were there any psychology or science books that helped inform or serve as research for your topics about grief or guilt that you explore in your book, whether it's books or articles or, conversations you've had? Or were there especially valuable touchstones that you either could name specifically or that you could discuss in general?
I didn't really refer to books. I did look into, I did read a lot on the internet about the psychology of guilt. I did read quite a bit on physics and time travel, and I'd done some of that for work for my articles, so I was familiar with that part. And I always have been fascinated with cosmology and that aspect of physics. So it was also something I kind of just, was happy to work into the story. But I don't think there was quite a bit of physics books I read as when I was younger. So I think those helped me have some background to be able to do the research when I needed to do the research. But I don't get that deep into it, and it's not anything super complex. So I don't know that I needed to do much there. I did ask a couple of physicists to look over the stuff, because at some point I was like, I don't want to make an error, because that science journalist in me is worried and wants to fact check a novel, which is ridiculous. But yeah, at some point I was like, I have to make sure that it's not like terribly wrong. At least a little wrong is okay, but not terribly wrong.
Did you spend more time on the physics or more time on the sewers? Do you have knowledge about sewers? Did you have to?
Sadly, I do. Yes, I did work as an engineer, and I did design sewers. So that part I had to do no research for that. Like that was all like
It's
memory.
so funny you say sadly. You know, in the book jacket, it's a line that every time I read it makes me smile. Emma had the perfect trifecta: a long-term job as an engineer designing sewers, a steady relationship with her reliable boyfriend, an adoring and creative best friend about whom she wasn't quite ready to admit her unrequited feelings. That is the perfect trifecta. A job about sewers, a best friend you can't tell you love, and a boyfriend described as reliable. It's such a funny idea.
It's the imperfect trifecta.
Exactly. She is an imperfect trifecta. A question that is far more serious, which does deserve an answer. Christy asks, do you think that your childhood experience of war informed your choice of careers, which is not what I thought she was going to ask in the beginning of that question. Do you feel experiencing that type of intensity as a younger person made writing feel like a valuable, use of your time?
That's a really interesting question, and I don't know that I can answer that because I don't know like what influences make you make which choices in life.
Right.
But I will say, like, I grew up in a house where both science and literature were very much a part of our lives. So my father was big on both science and literature, and my mother paints. So all of that, I think, had an effect. And I always loved writing, and I didn't realize it. I didn't realize that writing and words were so important to me until I started doing it. And then it was like a light bulb went off, and I was like, all these years I knew, but I didn't know.
Was
This
this
was
your life as a sewage engineer? How did it come to be?
how did writing come to be?
Yeah, you said a light bulb went off when you started putting pen to paper in that way. What was that moment? Why did you start writing? If you even know the answer to that.
I don't know the answer. Actually, it's not like a simple answer, but I was just searching. While I was working as an engineer, I was constantly searching. I was taking acting classes at night.
Right.
I was taking piano classes at 6 a.m. before I went to work. I was, doing everything I could because somehow something didn't feel like it was satisfying a part of me. And I always, ever since I was young, I would always perform Persian poetry with other people and musicians and whatnot. But something just didn't. I didn't know what it was. I knew I needed a creative outlet. I even tried sketching and painting, and I tried all of it because just needed something. And they were all great, but they weren't exactly the right fit. And then one day, it was really super random. I decided I was going to go get a degree in some other place, continue with math stuff. And then I saw that NYU had a science journalism writing program. And I literally just decided like that without much thinking. And it sounded like the worst idea in the world. And then from there, I tried to make my way into it. Once I learned how to actually put sentences together, because I didn't, that in itself was a challenge. Then I started to take creative writing classes and try to find my way into this world.
And your description of yourself could be mapped pretty accurately onto Emma in terms of her attitude at this point in her life, where she feels like something is lacking and she's not sure whether it's her boyfriend or her job. She is certain that the loss of this best friend is a profound, source of pain. But is there Do you feel as though there is a creative element of Emma missing that needs these parallel worlds to exist for her? Like in the same way that you say that you personally were, looking for music and art and writing and a creative outlet for you. Do you see that same lack in the character that you created, who is very different from you in a lot of ways, but seems to be driven by a similar need for more in her life at the moment?
Yeah, I don't think I don't think she's looking for a creative outlet. I feel like she just fell into a comfortable pattern that worked for her. But then she had this third element, which was Spencer, who kind of brought this excitement into her life, whether it was like parties in New York City or a concert in this place or whatever it was, or like it just changed that very everyday suburban existence into something, because she never wanted to be like her parents. She didn't want to like watch Jeopardy every night and fall asleep every night and just go through the same motions and have a kid and a white fence and all of that. And I think he made her feel like she hadn't fallen into that. But the minute he left the relationship, it kind of, she realized she's back in that. But also her own relationship, which was inadequate, started to fall apart, because really those two people were sort of forming one relationship for all three of them, not just her, but for her boyfriend too, who put a lot of his responsibilities onto Spencer. Whatever he didn't want to do, he passed them on to Spencer. And for Spencer, they were also so they really, like, the three of them really worked together, and you take one apart and they all fall apart. And I think that her boyfriend just didn't understand that for the longest time in the book. But I think everybody has to like understand that it was sort of a three-person relationship.
Right, and trying to preserve it without that third leg of the stool meant that it inevitably had to fall over. And hearing you talk made me realize that that's so smart that Spencer was the creative outlet that I was asking if she needed in her life. Like that was the source of excitement and joy and passion. And then when he's not there, it's about that gap and that absence. That's all our time tonight. I so appreciate how I don't know, how articulate and honest and straightforward and just beautifully you were able to discuss a book without giving away any of the major twists and turns and plot points. So for those of you insane enough to not have yet purchased a copy of this book, hopefully Sara gave you enough that that you'll want to know how it all fits together and sort of what mysteries become unlocked. Please click that light green button to purchase a copy. This has been a conversation I've been looking forward to, that I enjoyed even more than I thought I would. The book is spectacular. The author is a hell of a writer, and it was a treat being able to chat with you for these 45, 60 minutes.
Thank you so much, Brian. I mean, you took this anxiety out of this whole situation. It was so wonderful chatting with you. I just felt like we're sitting in our living room, and that was amazing. Thanks. And thank you for hosting us.
Thank you both, Sara and Brian, and to everyone who tuned in this evening. It was a super stimulating conversation, and we'd love to have you back for the next one. Climate change is such an important topic, and definitely need more fiction about it. So thanks once again, and please support your local independent bookstore. Again, just click that green button below, grab a copy of this terrific book. And if you guys would like regular updates on our upcoming events, make sure to follow us on Crowdcast and subscribe to our newsletter. If you tuned in late this evening, once we close out, it'll just take a minute or so to load, and then you can replay the video. We'll also be posting it to our YouTube channels. Thanks, everyone, once again. Thank you, Sara and Brian. Have a good, safe evening, everyone.